This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. We start with an update on the death of Iran's president and foreign minister. NTD's Jack Bradley is at the State Department with the U.S. response.
The U.S. is expressing its condolences to the death of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, while also condemning his history of human rights abuses. Raisi, the foreign minister of Iran, and 6 others were killed in a helicopter crash on Sunday in northwest Iran near Azerbaijan. Their helicopter ran into blizzard conditions, but there's been no official cause of the crash. Here's State Department spokesman Matthew Miller on this.
We have been quite clear that Ebrahim Raisi was a brutal participant in the repression of the Iranian people for nearly 4 decades. He was involved in numerous horrific human rights abuses, including playing a key role in the extrajudicial killing of thousands of political prisoners in 1988. Some of the worst human rights abuses occurred during his tenure as president, especially the human rights abuses against the women and girls of Iran. That said,
President Raisi was 63 years old. He was the second most powerful person in Iran's political structure after Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who was 85. Now, Khamenei has the ultimate say on foreign policy and Iran's nuclear program. He expressed condolences and said there would be no disruption to state affairs. The first Vice President, Mohammad Mokhber, is taking his place. An election must be held within 50 days. But experts have said that elections in Iran are mostly a sham, with the real power to elect a president being with the supreme leader and his appointed council. Many other world leaders expressed their condolences, including the heads of the Chinese regime, Russia, India, Iraq, and also from Iran-backed terrorist organizations Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. This blow to the Iranian regime is compounded by a failed missile attack from Iran to Israel, a direct attack that occurred last month, but which failed to cause that much damage. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The International Criminal Court seeking arrests of both Hamas and Israeli leaders. The ICC's chief prosecutor today said authorities on both sides of the conflict have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, prompting a response from the U.S. Department of State. NTD's Fiona G. has more.
The ICC arrest warrants would target Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and 2 other commanding officials, as well as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. The U.S. Department of State condemned the move.
The United States fundamentally rejects the announcement today from the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court that he is applying for arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials together with warrants for Hamas terrorists. There should be no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Furthermore, the United States has been clear since well before the current conflict that the ICC has no jurisdiction over this matter.
The court accuses Hamas of crimes against humanity, including extermination, murder, taking hostages, rape, and torture, among others. It accuses the Israeli government of war crimes, including starving civilians, causing great suffering, and intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population, among other war crimes. Judges must now decide whether to approve Khan's request.
If they don't issue any warrants, then that's an end of it. If they do issue the warrants, then those named in the warrants will either have to surrender or be surrendered to the court, or they'll have to be careful where they travel.
Israeli officials have condemned the request for arrests.
Branding Israel's leaders and soldiers as war criminals will pour jet fuel on the fires of anti-Semitism. It will also be the first time that a democratic country fighting for its life according to the rules of war is itself accused of war crimes.
Meanwhile, Hamas has also denounced the ICC's decision, accusing them of trying to, quote, equate the victim with the executioner. They also called on the ICC to arrest more Israeli leaders. Fiona G., NTD News.
Democrats and Republicans both strongly condemning the International Criminal Court prosecutor's request to arrest Israeli leaders. The Biden administration vowing to continue standing with Israel. Joining us now is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What are the latest comments President Biden has on Israel?
Good evening to you, Tiff. So at an event just now at the Rose Garden celebrating Jewish American heritage, President Biden says what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide, adding that he's rejecting the ICC chief prosecutor's request to seek arrest warrants for both Israeli and Hamas leaders. Watch.
We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide.
President Biden also reiterates that his support for Israel's security remains ironclad. And that's after he sent out a statement earlier today about the ICC's request. In a statement, President Biden calls the request outrageous, adding that there's no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. And Biden asked that the U.S. will always stand with Israel, and the White House National Security spokesperson also said this in a call with reporters.
IDF soldiers are not waking up in the morning, putting their boots on the ground with direct orders to go kill innocent civilians in Gaza. And the larger issue here is, as I've said earlier and as was in our statements, we don't believe the ICC has any jurisdiction here.
Both Democratic and Republican lawmakers are also condemning the ICC.
The ICC has succeeded only in discrediting itself even further as a rogue kangaroo court.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson says House Republicans are looking at sanctions against ICC officials. And as the war goes on in Gaza, the White House says it's now nearing a deal with Saudi Arabia to bring stability to the region and also potentially normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
We believe we're very close.
And President Biden over the weekend said this.
I'm also working around the clock for more than just one ceasefire. I'm working to bring the region together.
And in his speech just now, President Biden said a two-state solution is to provide enduring peace and security for Israel. Back to you, Tiff.
Iris, thanks for those updates. As the prosecution rests its case today in the criminal trial of former President Trump, the defense called two rebuttal witnesses. After their testimony, the defense argued that the case should be dismissed, saying the prosecution did not prove its case. Here's Trump speaking after court adjourned for the day.
I think the case is going very well. We've asked for termination of the case. This case should be terminated. This shouldn't go anywhere. It should be terminated right now.
Meanwhile, Michael Cohen wrapped up his testimony today with more contradictory statements. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has the details.
In seesaw testimony Monday, Michael Cohen made more admissions during the defense's cross-examination, but then reversed when the prosecution asked him a second round of questions. Key areas covered by both sides included whether or not Cohen had a retainer agreement with Trump in 2017, and whether or not the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels was legal. Cohen's conflicting testimony answered yes and no. Last Tuesday, when prosecutors asked Cohen about invoices he submitted to the Trump Organization in 2017, Cohen said they were false because he indicated that they were pursuant to a retainer agreement, when actually he was being reimbursed for the $130,000 plus a bonus and other fees, he said. On cross-examination Monday, Cohen admitted that he did work as Trump's personal attorney in 2017, even though he didn't meet with him frequently. The defense also got Cohen to admit that he had 6 other clients in 2017 who were paying him pursuant to retainer agreements, although he said he didn't meet them very often either. But on redirect, Cohen stated that he never submitted a retainer agreement to Trump and that he didn't expect to get paid for the legal work he did do in 2017. Cohen, as well as several other witnesses, have testified that the non-disclosure agreement he negotiated with Stormy Daniels was a legal document. But today, Cohen stated that this agreement was not legal. The reason? Because the payment was actually a campaign donation to influence the 2016 election. Cohen previously testified that in 2018, he pled guilty to a campaign violation and said that Trump was not involved. But today, he reiterated that it was all a lie. The prosecution rested its case after calling 20 witnesses. The defense called 2 rebuttal witnesses, including a paralegal who works for Todd Blanche and Robert Costello, an attorney who previously advised Michael Cohen. He testified that Michael Cohen told him repeatedly that Trump knew nothing about the payment to Stormy Daniels. Arlene Richards reporting from the criminal courthouse in Manhattan.
Senate Democrats are bringing the border security bill back to the floor for a second vote after it failed earlier this year. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he's bringing back the bipartisan border security bill after the first vote attempted on February failed. This time, the bill will be presented as a standalone legislation. According to Democrats, the border crisis is a result of Republican inaction. Here's Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, a co-author of the bipartisan border security bill, accusing Republicans of politicizing the border crisis.
Senator McConnell said it out loud. Senator Lankford said it out loud. The reason that this bill was defeated 98 days ago is because Donald Trump told Republicans that it's better for Republicans to keep this issue alive and to not change the law to secure the country.
Making the announcement on Saturday, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer acknowledged that the bill will not have the full support of Democrats. And in a separate tweet on Monday, Senator Schumer also accused the former president of blocking the strongest border security bill in a generation. Senator James Lankford, the Republican from Oklahoma and a co-author of bipartisan border security bill, chastised Democrats for the lack of border security progress and asked what will be Congress's next move.
I hope not just do political messaging. I hope not just saying we'll bring up this bill to fail that we all know is going to fail. I hope it's actually sit down together and say, let's do the work to actually resolve this issue. That is what people sent us to do.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and House Republican leadership released a joint statement on Monday accusing Senator Chuck Schumer of trying to give his vulnerable members cover by bringing a vote on a bill which has already failed. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has already said that if the bill passes the Senate, it would be dead on arrival. House Republican leadership has also stressed that they've already passed H.R. 2 and the Laken-Riley Act, 2 immigration and border security related bills that Senator Chuck Schumer has refused to bring to the Senate floor for debate. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Earlier, we spoke with Middle East affairs analyst Gerard Filitti about the death of Iran's president and the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants. Filitti is also senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. Gerard Filitti, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Gerard, to begin with the death of Iran's president, I want to get into what that means for Iran. But first, how do you see this impacting U.S. troops in the region?
Well, U.S. troops are on higher alert right now. The death was unexpected. A helicopter accident in the northwest of Iran is not something anyone plans for. But there's always within Iran the potential for civil unrest when there is an event like this. And civil unrest also comes oftentimes with menacing words and actions towards the United States, if not by Iran itself, by its proxies. So U.S. forces are on higher alert to make sure that we're not attacked in the name of the Iranian Revolution during this transitional period for them.
Now, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, is seeking arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, but also Hamas leader Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza. This is in terms of war crimes over the October 7th attack, as well as in the Gaza war. Now, this is the first time the ICC has targeted the leader of a close U.S. ally. How do you read the significance of this move?
Well, it's very significant in part because the International Criminal Court appears to be political and not judicial in this decision to issue arrest warrants. It looks to be appeasing both sides or playing both sides by issuing proper warrants for the leaders of Hamas who participated in atrocities on October 7 and after, but also against the leaders of Israel who have been carrying out a defensive war within legal parameters, within internationally recognized legal parameters. So this looks very much like a political decision, and I expect that the United States and other allies will stand with and support Israel through this.
And practically speaking, what's next for the individuals named in the warrant?
Well, practically speaking, the government of Israel may have an interest in contesting this, or it may not. Ultimately, Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute, the statute that established the International Criminal Court, so the court does not have jurisdiction over Israel. It relies on other countries to enforce a warrant. So, for example, if Prime Minister Netanyahu or Defense Minister Gallant were to travel to a country like France, for example, they could be arrested there and deported to The Hague for trial. So it's not likely that Netanyahu or Gallant will be traveling to a country like that anytime soon. Those countries have an obligation. But otherwise, within Israel, within the current conduct of the war, it's not likely to have any meaningful effect. If anything, it will solidify Israeli support behind Netanyahu for what is perceived as a political and an illegal warrant.
And what do these arrests mean for the Iranian leadership, or does it have any impact there?
It does not have much impact in practical terms. However, this is a massive propaganda victory for the Iranian regime and for Hamas and for other terrorist organizations as well. This feeds into the narrative that we've been seeing troubling so on American campuses and throughout the world. We have pro-Hamas demonstrators railing about Israeli genocide, which we all know not to be something that's true. But now that you have an international body, the ICC, which is an organ of the United Nations, issuing arrest warrants, it rekindles these discussions, and it basically pours gasoline on the flames of discontent that we've seen rising up around the world.
And speaking of Iran, what does Raisi's death mean for the war in Gaza, especially given all the reports saying that Iran has been backing Hamas?
Well, Raisi's death doesn't mean all that much, to be honest. His replacement, interim president, has already been named. The Iranian people have 50 days before they need to hold elections to have another permanent president. But Iran is not really governed by the president. It's governed by the mullahs. It's governed by the Ayatollah Khamenei. It's not something that the president, even though he does have significant power, he's not the one who sets policy. That comes from the Ayatollahs, from the ruling cleric class, and that's unchanged. That's always been a focus on destroying Israel, on countering American influence in the region, and on establishing an Islamic theocracy in Iran and in the Middle East. So that's not going to change. The only thing that's changing is the name of the president.
Now, reports say that Raisi was next in line to become the supreme leader, given that Khamenei is 85 already. Who do you see as next in line then for the supreme leader?
Ironically, it's possible that Khamenei's own son is in line for that leadership position. He has been groomed for that kind of leadership for many years now. It's not clear whether there would be discontent within Iran if this were a hereditary appointment, so to speak. But he is seen as very popular among the religious figures who are ruling Iran at the present time. So that is very much a possible outcome, that we will see another Khamenei ruling Iran for the next generation.
And lastly, what do you see this meaning in terms of U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Iran, but also the war in the Middle East, especially given that the Biden administration has been pushing for the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, this puts a pause effectively on U.S. ambitions with Iran, because until there is a president, even though the Ayatollahs control Iran, until there's a president elected in 50 days, it's not really possible to negotiate or enter into nuclear treaties with them. However, ultimately, American policy will remain unchanged. It is still the policy of the United States to counter Iranian terrorism and support for destruction of the region, while at the same time trying to minimize the possibility that they develop nuclear weapons. So really, there is no substantive change. However, there is an opportunity here, because this Raisi was a very unpopular figure within Iran. He sparked a lot of outcry and protests in recent years, and there is always the opportunity for overthrowing the regime, but that's not something that can happen from within. That's something that would require American support. So this is an opportunity for America to be more involved in Iranian domestic policy, to foment unrest if it chose to do so, but I don't think that this administration wants to go down that road.
Gerard Felitti, thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
A big day for Taiwan as its new president, Lai Ching-te, also known as William Lai, assumes office today. This comes amid high tensions. Taiwan has been facing pressure from the Chinese regime, including regular Air Force and Navy activity near the island since the election in January.
Taiwan President William Lai asked China on Monday to stop its military and political threats during his inauguration speech. He says peace is the only choice, and that Beijing had to respect the choice of the Taiwanese people. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo attended the ceremony, while the Biden administration sent a group of former officials to observe the event, marking bipartisan U.S. support for Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party views Taiwan as part of its territory, despite never having ruled the island. It has threatened to take control of Taiwan by force if necessary. Taiwan is one of America's major allies in the region, and among those pushing back against Beijing. William Lai is Taiwan's former vice president. He has evolved his position from a supporter of Taiwan's independence to advocating for maintaining the status quo and possible talks with Beijing. Lai received congratulations from politicians and delegations from 12 nations that maintain official diplomatic relations with Taiwan, as well as politicians from the US, Japan, and European countries. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken congratulated Lai, expressing the desire to work together to advance shared interests, deepen the unofficial relationship, and uphold peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Lai intends to continue his predecessor's efforts in maintaining stability with China, enhancing Taiwan's security through military imports, expanding the defense industry, and strengthening partnerships with unofficial allies like the U.S., Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange could appeal his extradition to the United States. The High Court in London has just ruled in his favor. In the U.S., he faces espionage charges. Assange's lawyers argue that his free speech rights would not be adequately protected if he is extradited. They convinced the court's two judges that U.S. guarantees were insufficient. Assange was indicted on 17 espionage charges and 1 charge of computer misuse. The indictments stem from the publication of a trove of classified documents on his website WikiLeaks almost 15 years ago. American prosecutors allege that Assange helped U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning steal diplomatic cables and military files. Assange's lawyers say he could face up to 175 years in prison. U.S. authorities have said any sentence would likely be much shorter. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak today apologizing to the victims of a scandal involving infected blood. It's considered the worst treatment disaster in the history of the UK's National Health Service and resulted in thousands of deaths. A report found that the disaster could have been avoided and that attempts were made to conceal it. NTD's Malcolm Hudson has more.
The infected blood inquiry has found the scandal could largely have been avoided and there was a pervasive cover-up to hide the truth. More than 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C between the 1970s and 1990s through contaminated blood and blood products. The inquiry chairman, Sir Brian Langstaff, said he found this disaster was no accident.
People put their trust in doctors and the government to keep them safe. And that trust was betrayed. And then the government compounded the agony by telling them that nothing wrong had been done, that they'd had the best available treatment, and that as soon as tests were available, they were introduced. And both of those statements were untrue.
The inquiry's more than 2,500-page report documents a catalogue of failures which had catastrophic consequences. More than 3,000 people died as a result, with people still dying week after week now. These include people who needed blood transfusions for accidents, in surgery or during childbirth, and patients with certain blood disorders who were treated with donated blood plasma or blood transfusions. Jason Evans, the director and founder of infected blood campaign group Factor 8, said the report is everything they wanted.
For me, the key finding that Sir Brian's been very clear about is that commercial Factor 8 products never should have been licensed for use. And if that was the case, it's my profound belief my own father wouldn't have been infected with HIV, and neither would have hundreds of others, and thousands more HCV, hepatitis C infections also would not have occurred.
The inquiry found patients were knowingly exposed to unacceptable risks of infection. Some of the key failures highlighted in the report include a failure to act over risks linked to contaminated blood, some of which were known before the NHS was established in 1948. The slowness of the response to the scandal. For instance, it was apparent by mid-1982 that there was a risk AIDS could be transmitted by blood, but the government failed to take steps to reduce that risk. Some children with bleeding disorders, such as haemophilia, were treated as objects of research. The report said some of these children were given multiple riskier treatments. Regulatory failures, including the licensing of dangerous products and failure to remove them from the market when concerns were raised. The inquiry also found deliberate attempts were made to conceal the disaster, including evidence of Whitehall officials destroying documents. Sir Brian said proper compensation must be paid to all who have been wronged. Ministers have earmarked around £10 billion for a compensation package for those affected. Public inquiries are prohibited from making any recommendations about prosecutions. However, other countries affected by the scandal have seen doctors, politicians and other ministers brought before the courts. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Joining me now to break down the latest developments in Trump's trial today is criminal defense attorney Jacqueline Goodman. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. To begin, in court today, Trump's defense lawyer Todd Blanche got Michael Cohen to admit to stealing $30,000 from the Trump Organization. What is your reaction to that?
You know, Cohen really held his own for, 25 hours of testimony. And, but, you know, the defense did do damage. Clearly, they've been really telling the jury over and over again that he's a liar. And they now had this sort of bombshell today that he was also a thief. And Cohen, to his credit, really didn't look flustered by it so much as he just sort of answered it the way, you know, he was sort of normal about it. He sort of normalized it. Yeah, I mean, that was a hit.
In terms of the prosecution, they chose to end with Michael Cohen, who admitted to lying on multiple occasions in the past to Congress. What do you make of the prosecution's choice to end with Cohen?
You know, I'm so surprised by it. I don't really hear anybody else talking about it, but trials are these storytellings. They're really drama, they're behavioral science, all of it all together, because you're trying to get 12 people, especially the prosecution's trying to get all 12 of those people to go his way. So to end with really not just Michael Cohen, but Stormy Daniels into Michael Cohen was a risky choice, and it feels like it's sort of high risk, no reward. They could have ended with Hope Hicks, who was a very strong witness, starting with David Pecker, putting, you know, sort of sandwiching your weaker witnesses between them and ending strong on someone that we know that the jury would have respect for, is the way that you would expect somebody to tell that story. So it was really kind of a risky thing to do, is to leave the jury with the memory of this very flawed witness. I think that was really kind of a risky move.
And on that note, the prosecution has now rested their case, while the defense called out Robert Costello as a witness who advised Michael Cohen in the past. What stood out to you from Costello's testimony today?
You know, it's something similar to what happened with Stormy Daniels, but the judge was clearly upset and seemed to be telegraphing his disdain for Costello, saying things just kind of outrageous based on the rest of the trial. You know, are you giving me a side eye? Are you trying to stare me down? And stopping the trial and ordering the jury out. And those are very dramatic moments that the jury's really going to understand. And juries like judges and judges like juries. And so they're going to be taking what the judge is thinking about this witness. Jurors also think that the judge knows more about the witnesses and about the trial than they'll ever know. And so I think they take clues from the judge as to who to believe and who to stay away from. And so I think that happened a bit with Stormy Daniels. You saw the judge getting a little frustrated with Stormy Daniels, but you see it, you know, so much more explosively when it comes to Costello. And so I think, and the fact that they're going to be thinking of that through the end of the night and into the next morning, I think is very powerful.
I want to expand on your point, because it was a dramatic day in court as the judge, Juan Merchan, actually briefly cleared the courtroom after that heated exchange with Costello. You know, there were reports of Costello staring down the judge. What did you make of Costello's conduct in the courtroom?
Hard to imagine what Costello was thinking he would get out of this. I mean, really, I think that's just a lack of preparation of that witness. For 25 hours or so, Cohen, probably well rehearsed, he was just unflappable. He didn't lose his cool, whereas Costello came in just guns blazing, and it's really not the kind of place where you can do that while the jury is going to be impressed by you, and particularly not with this judge. So I think that was a misstep, I think, on the part of defense.
Based on what happened today, do you think it's still possible for the trial to wrap up this week, or what can we expect to see next?
You know, I never put my client on unless I feel like I've got nothing else to lose. And so most legal commentators are saying they don't expect Donald Trump to testify. But the one thing that a lawyer cannot decide for the client, everything else is strategy, but when it comes to whether they testify or not, that is entirely the purview of the defendant himself, a personal right to him. So it'll be interesting to know whether Donald Trump testifies. There's been a lot of speculation about that. Most think he won't, but we'll see. If he doesn't, then I do think that the trial would wrap up next week.
I mean, Trump testifying would definitely make headlines. So Jacqueline Goodman, criminal defense attorney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
The California GOP finished up their three-day spring convention on Sunday. One prominent theme was election integrity. Another was uniting the party and connecting with voters, regardless of party preference, to fix key issues in the state and nation. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
The border, inflation, public safety, and homelessness were some of the common issues people highlighted at the convention over the weekend. RNC co-chair Lara Trump addressed one area of concern during a dinner banquet on Saturday.
Well, it is our number one focus at the RNC right now, election integrity. We have two jobs at the RNC: get out the vote and protect the ballot.
She said the RNC wants to make sure the votes that come in for Trump in November are protected, and votes cast by people who aren't legally allowed to vote aren't counted.
At the RNC, if you come to our offices, the bulk of the staff you will see in our building is focused solely on election integrity.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem also spoke on Saturday during a lunch banquet.
I don't think it's about political parties. I think it is about people who love America and people who are trying to destroy it.
Many attendees echoed that they're starting to see more people find that they align with the party's values.
And the reason for that is because people are being adversely impacted across this nation, regardless of party affiliation. You go into a store, you go to the gas station, you see what's going on the border right now.
California Senate Minority Leader Brian Jones said that the Democrats have been in charge too long.
Republicans are coming together this weekend to communicate to Californian voters across the board, Republicans, Democrats, no party preference, people that haven't even registered yet. Go register to vote in November, because Republicans are carrying the message that we have the principles, we have the values, and we have the commitment to fix California.
This California GOP convention was one of two held every year and is the last one before the upcoming elections in November. Jason Blair, NTD News.
The Supreme Court is turning down a challenge to Maryland's ban on so-called assault weapons. Those firearms include the AR-15 rifle, a gun used in several high-profile shootings. Maryland's law classifies what it defines as assault weapons, similar to military rifles, as illegal. This latest Scotus decision keeps the current ban in place as similar legal battles continue in other states. The court is also considering separate cases regarding firearm possession for domestic violence offenders and the federal ban on bump stocks. The container ship that caused the deadly Baltimore bridge collapse was refloated at high tide today. It began slowly moving back to port, guided by several tugboats. The Dali was grounded at the collapse site for weeks after crashing into one of the bridge's supporting columns, killing 6 construction workers. Today, the ship appeared to start moving shortly after 6 a.m. as crews began maneuvering it out of the wreckage. It started and stopped a few times before slowly backing away from the collapse site. Officials have said the Dali will likely remain in the port for several weeks and undergo temporary repairs. It will then be moved to a shipyard for more substantial repairs. Red Lobster just filed for bankruptcy. What went wrong at the iconic seafood restaurant, and what do its troubles say about the changing American economy? NTD's Dave Martin has more.
This is big.
Red Lobster has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The iconic American restaurant chain, known for its Caesar salads, Cheddar Bay biscuits, and endless seafood, is trying to sell its business.
Someone's going to own this thing, and they're going to, businesses aren't worth a whole lot dead. They're worth a whole lot more alive. It's just a question of what's the profitable core?
Bankruptcy expert Thomas Brazil says the restaurant chain will likely continue operating, but with far fewer stores. The new owner may keep the ones that are profitable and sell the rest. He says they're failing partially because of their place in the economy.
They found themselves, I think, in no man's land. They're not Chipotle, so like high-end, super fast casual, and they're not, you know, like considered incredibly fancy sit down.
Brazil says the survivors are either catering to the rich by being very fancy and expensive, or by catering to everyone else by being fast, cheap, and casual. Red Lobster is neither.
You're not going to take your wife there on your anniversary unless you want her to be your ex-wife. But it is now competing with fine dining. If you're going to pay $40, $50 a head for a dinner, why would you go to Red Lobster? Why wouldn't you go to someplace a little bit nicer?
Analyst Vijay Marolia says Red Lobster also made bad business decisions, particularly for offering endless shrimp for only $20.
There seems to be a challenge on social media right now where young men and women, or whatever they identify as on any given day, are saying, I ate 31 shrimp. I had 5 plates of shrimp. I'm going for my own personal record of 51 shrimp.
Marolia says this deal was intended to bring people into the stores while losing money itself. But people enjoyed the endless shrimp so much, Red Lobster lost much more money than it anticipated. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin in person. Dave, quite a lot in sports news today, but let's start in the NBA, where we had a pair of surprising Game 7s yesterday to set up the conference finals matchups. Let's start in the East, where the Celtics are the favorites. What can we expect in this series?
Fast-paced games, a lot of scoring. I think fans are going to like this series. These are the top 2 highest scoring teams in the league. In fact, Indiana's 123 points per game average in the regular season. That was the 6th highest of all time. Boston isn't far behind at 120. Now, Boston plays better defense, though, but they are without Kristaps Porzingis, who's their top shot blocker, and I think one of the more underrated players in the league, averaging 20 points, 7 rebounds a game. He hasn't played since April 29 with a calf injury. It's unknown when exactly he'll return, though it's theorized it could be during this series. Now, one thing about Indiana making it this far that I think has to be said, they beat Milwaukee in the first round, though the Bucks were without their 2 superstars, that's Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard. Then they beat the Knicks in the last round, and then New York was without Julian Randle, plus they were dealing with injuries during the series to Josh Hart and OG Anunoby. Plus in Game 7, Jalen Brunson, their best player, missed most of the second half with a broken hand. So they've been a little bit fortunate to get to this point. I think Boston prevails in this series.
Over in the Western Conference, Minnesota pulled off a shocking Game 7 road win over the reigning champion Denver Nuggets yesterday. Do they become the favorites now?
You know, that seems pretty logical, but most people just cannot imagine Minnesota as being the favorites to win the title. They've never advanced past this stage in their franchise history. They do have a great defense, though, led by Defensive Player of the Year Rudy Gobert, who's now won this award 4 times. Plus, they have up-and-coming star Anthony Edwards, who's their leading scorer. Now, he shot just 6 for 24 yesterday, yet Minnesota still came back to win the game. That says a lot, I think, about their defense. Now, I think how their defense plays against Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks will make this an entertaining series. Doncic led the league in scoring, but he was also second in assists, similar to Nikola Jokic's output, but they play much differently. Doncic really penetrates the defense and then kicks it out to an open shooter or scores it himself. I think, though, that Minnesota's home court advantage is going to be the difference in this series.
Looking now at golf news, Xander Schauffele won the PGA Championship yesterday in record fashion, yet was somewhat overshadowed by the drama around Scotty Scheffler. What is next for Scheffler?
4 charges, including second-degree assault of a police officer, which is actually a felony. This is after his vehicle allegedly dragged an officer to the ground.
He has a court date in early June, and his attorney has already said he'll be pleading not guilty.
To me, it's still the most incredible thing, though, is that he actually made it back to the PGA Championship that morning in time for his 10 a.m. start. shot a 66 that day. That was the 7th best score of the day out of 150-something players. Saturday, though, he struggled, shooting a 73. Sunday, though, he made up for it with a 65. He finished tied for 8th. Schauffele, meanwhile, had the best 4-round score ever at a major, though he had to hold off Bryson DeChambeau on the last hole to win. Really, the only thing that could have made this a more entertaining weekend is if Tiger Woods had been in contention. Unfortunately, he missed the weekend cut. Now, hopefully, he will play the U.S. Open next month.
Now in the NHL tonight, we have Game 7 between the Edmonton Oilers and the Vancouver Canucks. Now, what is the playing status of Vancouver forward Brock Besser?
He is out. Now, what he's out with is a bit of a mystery. The coach has not exactly said what the injury is. But in any case, it's a big loss for Vancouver. He's been their leading goal scorer this postseason with 7 goals, and they have not generated much offense at all. So it's a big loss for them. Now, they do get to play this game in Vancouver at home, so that they've got that. This has been a very close series. No team has won more than 2 games straight, and 5 of the 6 games have been decided by a goal. Personally, though, I think a lot of people want to see Connor McDavid and the Oilers win. McDavid is one of the best players in the game. He's won 3 MVPs. He's never made it past the conference finals, let alone to the Stanley Cup finals. In any case, the winner of this series will play Dallas in the next round.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.